You are standing on the deck of an ancient Phoenician ship at the very moment the world around you first begins to shatter your illusions. The stench of the sea mingles with a sour fear, and the waves carry not discovery, but hopelessness and a dull, gnawing despair. You set out in search of new shores, yet every step towards them is a step into nothingness, where behind the myth of great discoveries lies nothing but a tedious struggle for survival, foolish hopes, and small defeats. Here, at the edge of the known world, there is no glory or miracles awaiting you, only the truth of the futility of human effort and the lonely fame of returning home unnoticed. But before we begin, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you are watching from and what time it is there. I am truly curious to see who has joined us. Now, get comfortable. We are about to begin. You awaken on the deck of the ship, but awaken is too generous a word for the dismal transition from one discomfort to another. Your dreams, if one could call them such, are of the endless rolling of the sea and the ceaseless complaints of your shipmates. Above you, the pale sun drags itself reluctantly into the sky, already looking exhausted from the prospect of another day, illuminating the futility of your voyage. Around you, ropes creak and planks groan in tones so ancient and familiar that you have begun to wonder if the ship itself is older than the gods. The Phoenician ship is long, narrow, and purposefully ugly. It is built for function, not beauty, and its function is to keep you uncomfortably close to too many men and far too many fish. You share your tiny world with 3 dozen souls, although you have started to suspect some of them are less soul and more problem. Even the seagulls that circle overhead have a look of resigned disappointment, as if they had expected to find a better class of ship, or perhaps at least a tastier group of sailors. As always, the morning routine begins not with hope, but with resignation. Someone is shouting, as usual. Someone else is vomiting, also as usual. The captain stands at the prow, a figure carved from salt and stubbornness, squinting at the horizon like he expects it to apologize for yesterday's weather. You try to stand, only to remember how the boards have a vendetta against your knees. Breakfast, if such a grand word could ever be applied to your daily ration, is a piece of hard bread and a slice of dried fish, chewier than old rope and possibly older. Someone jokes that the fish was already halfway to mummyhood when the pyramids were new, and no one laughs, not because it is untrue, but because it is too true. The air smells of brine, sweat, mildew, and the lingering aroma of every meal ever spilled on these planks. The trireme is an ecosystem unto itself, and you are only a minor inhabitant, somewhere below the rats in both rank and influence. You busy yourself with the tasks of the day, hauling ropes, checking sails, pretending to care about the knots that hold the whole fragile world together. Navigation is a tedious art, made all the more tiresome by the lack of any proper tools. There are no compasses here, only stars above, and the memories of routes passed down by men who have been dead for so long that their advice is now a blend of legend and error. Sometimes the sun is your guide, sometimes the wind, but more often than not, it is the all too physical prod of the captain's staff that steers you in the right direction. As the day drags on, you watch the coastline slip away, replaced by the endlessly repeating blue of the Mediterranean. The sea is never truly blue, of course. Sometimes it is gray, sometimes green, and most often a dull, indifferent color that seems to mirror the mood of the crew. The wind carries stories of distant lands, but also the certainty that you will spend the next many days staring at the same miserable view. If the gods had intended man to explore, you think, they would have given him wings, or at the very least, a softer place to sleep. The other sailors are as much a part of the ship as the rigging. There is Adir, who complains about everything, but especially about things he cannot change, such as the weather or the price of olives in Tyre. There is Bealot, whose only known virtue is his ability to snore through storms, and Milky, who insists on singing melancholy songs about women none of you have met, but all of you suspect were invented for the sake of rhyme. You are not sure what you bring to the company, but by the look on their faces, it is not inspiration. Lunch is much like breakfast, only slightly damper. The captain delivers a speech about discipline and the sacred duty of Phoenician sailors to bring back wealth and knowledge to the great cities of the coast. You reflect, as you gnaw on your ration, that wealth and knowledge are best enjoyed on dry land, with a roof overhead and a distinct absence of rats. In the afternoon, you are assigned to patch a torn sail. The canvas is rough and uncooperative, much like every other aspect of this voyage. The needle pricks your fingers, and the bloodstains mingle with salt until you wonder if the sail is now worth more for its decorative pattern than its utility. You think about the legend of sailors who stitched gold thread into their sails, and you laugh, quietly, of course, because laughter is discouraged at sea. It uses too much energy, and besides, it reminds the others of how little there is to be cheerful about. As the sun begins its slow descent, you are struck by a rare moment of almost beauty. The horizon glows with a soft golden light, and for a fleeting instant, you understand why some men write poems about the sea. But the illusion is broken by the sudden shout of the captain, who has noticed that the water barrel is leaking again. You are sent to fetch the caulking tools, and by the time you return, the magic of the sunset has faded, replaced by the sticky aroma of pitch and the ceaseless bickering over whose fault the leak truly was. Night falls, heavy and inevitable. The crew wraps themselves in thin cloaks and thinner hopes, muttering prayers to Melkart and Astarte, to Bel, and to any other deity who might be listening. The stars above are cold and distant, offering neither comfort nor guidance. You lie awake, listening to the soft lap of water against the hull and the softer sound of Milky's endless song, and you wonder, perhaps not for the first time, what possessed you to leave the quiet safety of Tyre's harbor for this endless, wearying search for new shores. You think, with a trace of bitter amusement that maybe all the world's explorers are only running from something: boredom, fate, themselves. But there is nowhere to run at sea. There is only forward to whatever the morning brings, and the certain knowledge that it will look remarkably like the day before. The day you first spot a blurred suggestion of land on the horizon, it happens just as the wind loses interest in pushing the ship forward, leaving you all stranded on the watery expanse, as though the sea itself has grown tired of your company. There is a moment, fleeting and silent, where no one quite dares to speak. Your eyes, sore from too much sun and salt, could be playing tricks on you again. You learned a long time ago that the ocean is a grand deceiver. She paints mirages of coastlines in the clouds, shapes islands from the foam, and sometimes, if you squint just right, you can almost see a safe harbor in the pattern of the waves. But this time, the muttered curses of your shipmates confirm that you are not alone in your suspicion. The captain, who treats doubt as a personal insult, squints at the blurry smudge and pronounces it likely land, or at the very least, not more water, which is the closest thing to optimism you have heard since leaving Tyre. The crew's mood, however, does not lift. New shores, in the tales passed down from wrinkled grandmothers and drunk old sailors, mean monsters, curses, and certain doom. When you journey where no one has gone before, you are required by tradition to expect the worst. The rituals begin almost immediately, as though the threat of approaching terra incognita is a signal for every sailor to lose what little common sense he had left. The oldest deckhand, a man who claims to have seen every star in the sky at least twice, spits into the sea and mumbles a chant to ward off the hungry ones below. You are unsure whether he means sea monsters or creditors, but you wisely imitate his gesture just in case. Another sailor ties a bit of red cloth to the mast, a charm against evil spirits, though you suspect its true purpose is to use up leftover fabric and avoid mending actual sails. There is much talk of the gods, and even more talk of those beings that do not deserve a proper name. Stories circulate as freely as the stale air in the hold. Some men whisper of the sea serpent Yam, who sleeps beneath the waves and grows restless when mortals dare to sail new routes. Others fear the vengeful ghosts of shipwrecked sailors, doomed to follow passing vessels, forever searching for their own lost home. There is a certain fatalism in the air, the kind born from too many nights listening to storms and too many mornings cleaning up after them. The captain, always eager to maintain discipline, if not order, calls everyone together for a stern lecture about the importance of courage, unity, and ignoring old wives' tales. He assures the crew that the only true monsters on the sea are storms and fools. You nod along dutifully, as does everyone else, but you notice that even he wears a small talisman around his neck, a carved bit of wood shaped like the open hand of Tanit, the goddess said to protect sailors. In this world, it seems, no one is brave enough to trust only in their own abilities. Meals are now accompanied by elaborate rituals. Each piece of bread is broken with a silent wish for safety, Every cup of sour wine is poured with a glance at the sky in case the gods are watching. You find yourself muttering short prayers you do not remember learning, hoping that someone somewhere will hear and care. The cook, whose mood has always hovered between bad and worse, insists on feeding the hungry spirits a small portion of every meal, though it is unclear whether he means the rats or something even less savory. Nights grow longer, or perhaps it only feels that way, as the ship inches closer to whatever fate awaits. You find yourself listening for sounds beyond the creaks and groans of wood, the slither of something vast beneath the hull, the whisper of voices in languages you do not know, the far off beat of drums echoing over the waves. Every time a barrel rolls unexpectedly or a rope comes loose, someone offers an explanation rooted in bad luck or a forgotten promise to a sea god. You have never believed in curses, but after so many days and nights away from home, you begin to understand how a mind can turn shadows into omens. Your own superstitions, once a matter of private mockery, have become habit. You avoid stepping over certain knots in the deck because Milky claims that doing so will invite disaster. You catch yourself checking the direction of the wind 3 times before each shift at the oars, not for any navigational purpose, but simply because that is what you did yesterday, and things have not gotten much worse since then. There is comfort in these meaningless gestures, a sense that you are, if nothing else, part of a long and unbroken tradition of terrified men. The talk among the crew, already filled with fear, turns to what awaits on the new land. Some believe the shore will be inhabited by giants, others by tribes of cannibals or magicians. A few, blessed with more imagination than sense, claim there are islands where the trees bleed gold and the birds speak with the voices of the dead. You wonder why, if such places exist, anyone has ever returned to speak of them. The sky, when you look up at night, seems impossibly vast. The constellations are the same ones you learned as a child, but out here, far from familiar harbors, they take on a more menacing aspect. Orion becomes a warning rather than a guide, his belt of stars a reminder that every journey is fraught with unseen dangers. Even the moon, that pale and indifferent eye, seems to watch your progress with cool amusement, as though she has seen too many ships like yours vanish into oblivion to care about the fate of one more. There are, of course, practical fears. The ship is never truly dry. The boards sweat salt and mildew, and the smell clings to everything you own. Food runs low, and the water in the barrel is now as much brine as fresh. Sickness begins to make its slow rounds, first as a cough, then as a fever that no prayer can cure. You are told that to dream of home is unlucky, so you try not to, but some nights, in spite of yourself, you imagine the quiet streets of Tyre, the sound of market traders haggling over shellfish, and the way the air smelled in the hour before dawn. It hurts more than the salt sores on your feet. As the ship creeps closer to the unknown land, the atmosphere thickens with dread and anticipation in equal measure. The rituals grow stranger. One morning, You find someone has carved a set of eyes on the prow to see danger before it comes. Another has woven shells and bones into the netting, a protection against the evil that lives in the deep. The captain pretends not to notice, but his voice has taken on a note of forced cheerfulness, like a man whistling in a graveyard. On the evening before you are due to make landfall, the ship's company gathers for a shared meal, each man turning his portion over in his hands as if hoping to find a fortune written there. The stories grow darker. You listen as an old sailor recounts the tale of the last crew who sought new lands and found only death and madness. Someone else claims to have seen lights moving under the water, eyes as large as shields, and no one laughs. You stare out at the approaching darkness, feeling the pull of fear in your gut, a fear that is both ancient and new. It is the fear of all who venture into the unknown, a mixture of awe and terror, hope and regret. You tell yourself that you are not afraid, that you are a Phoenician sailor, a child of Tyre, born to ride the restless sea. But as the night deepens and the ship drifts ever closer to a land that may or may not exist, you cannot quite keep the old stories from crowding in. There are no true monsters, you remind yourself, only men and their mistakes. But sometimes, when the wind howls and the timbers groan, it is hard to believe even that. The day of landing arrives with neither fanfare nor heroism, but with a fog thick enough to swallow your mood and most of your resolve. The ship draws slowly toward the coastline that last night seemed impossibly close, and this morning looks as unwelcoming as an unpaid debt. No one volunteers to be the first to leave the dubious safety of the ship, but you sense that remaining on board might soon be considered a worse fate. You tell yourself, for the 100th time, that the unknown is simply the familiar, misplaced, though that is not particularly comforting when the familiar is this ship. Your feet hit the sand with a reluctance matched only by the squelching sound of your boots, heavy with brine and suspicion. You half expect the earth to reject you outright, perhaps by swallowing you up or by bursting into flames beneath your hesitant step. Instead, the shore remains stubbornly indifferent. The rest of the crew disembarks with as much enthusiasm as a flock of pigeons herded from a fountain, each man dragging his own battered dignity behind him. The landscape offers little encouragement. There is a scattering of twisted shrubs, some disinterested birds, and a strip of coastline so unimpressed by your arrival that it seems to sigh in disappointment. You might out with a grim sense of irony that the famed new world promised by the captain looks almost exactly like the old one, but with worse seating. The only thing less inviting than the land is the look on your companions' faces as they realize that adventure, as always, comes with a side order of discomfort. The business of trade begins at once. The captain, displaying his unique talent for optimism in the face of adversity, hauls out the boxes of wares, glass beads, colored fabrics, and little trinkets meant to inspire awe, or at least curiosity. Each item is presented with solemnity, as though offering the keys to the universe. The reality is that most of your inventory consists of things that could not fetch a decent price, even in the back alleys of Tyre. Still, you are a Phoenician. Haggling is in your blood, and if there is any hope of survival or success, it lies in the art of trading things of little value for things that can be eaten, drunk, or taken home as proof that you did not spend your journey in vain. The locals appear at last, first as moving shadows behind the trees, then as cautious figures venturing into the open. You try to look both friendly and unintimidating, a feat complicated by the number of weapons your crew feels compelled to polish at every opportunity. The locals, for their part, regard you as one might a shipwrecked octopus, unpleasant, possibly dangerous, but interesting enough to warrant a closer look. Their language is a mystery, made up of clipped syllables and guttural sounds that seem designed more for alarming birds than for conversation. The captain, undeterred by the total lack of shared vocabulary, launches into an elaborate pantomime intended to convey goodwill. He bows, smiles, and presents a bead necklace with a flourish so grand that it nearly sends the beads skittering into the sand. The local chieftain, at least you assume he is a chieftain, on account of his feathers, armbands, and the aura of resigned authority, accepts the gift with the kind of hesitation normally reserved for suspicious mushrooms. He responds with a lengthy monologue that may well be the first chapter of a local epic or simply a recipe for stew. No one can tell. Trade proceeds with a mixture of confusion and blind hope. A jar of purple dye is exchanged for what turns out to be a basket of extremely bitter fruit. Someone receives a woven mat in return for a fragment of pottery, which is then solemnly inspected by both sides for hidden curses. There is much laughter, some of it forced, and a series of facial expressions that run the gamut from polite bewilderment to open despair. Your attempts at communication are not helped by Milky, who tries to bridge the cultural gap by singing an old Tyrian sea shanty, only to discover that the tune is considered highly offensive in these parts. Negotiations become an exercise in mutual misinterpretation. Every hand gesture carries hidden meaning, none of which are ever intended. The locals nod gravely at your offers, then proceed to trade among themselves for your wares, sometimes before you have even agreed to the exchange. You begin to suspect that they have dealt with visitors before, perhaps many times, and have learned that patience and a poker face are the true keys to profitable diplomacy. The day's end brings the kind of exhaustion that only new beginnings can provide. The crew, for the most part, is still alive, though several are now convinced they have been hexed by the local wise woman, whose only crime appears to be an unusually intense stare. The captain claims the negotiations were a resounding success, citing as evidence the 3 baskets of inedible root vegetables and one very suspicious chicken now clucking resentfully on deck. You spend the evening conducting an inventory, counting and recounting your meager gains, and trying to decide whether the pile of peculiar shells you accepted in trade has any value at all. After a dinner of mystery, fruit, and regret, the crew gathers by a makeshift fire to swap stories of the day's events. Each version grows more elaborate with each telling. The chieftain becomes a king, the wise woman a witch, and your own role in the proceedings swells with each retelling until you are hailed as the savior of the expedition for not dropping the basket of roots. There is a grim camaraderie in the telling, a sense that whatever else happens, you are now in this strangeness together. As night descends, you reflect on what has truly been gained and lost. The sea is still visible beyond the dunes, an endless blue black promise that you could, in theory, leave at any time. But the shore, for all its unfamiliarity, holds its own strange appeal. There are new sounds, new smells, and the low murmur of voices in the darkness, neither entirely welcoming nor entirely hostile. For the first time since leaving Tyre, you allow yourself a cautious flicker of curiosity. It is only in the privacy of your makeshift bedding, half a mat, half a rock, that you admit to yourself how much you miss the simple certainties of home, the taste of proper wine, the sound of familiar language, the knowledge that whatever madness befell you during the day, it would always be explained away by sunrise. Here, everything is unexplained and perhaps unexplainable. Sleep comes fitfully, interrupted by dreams in which the new land shrinks and stretches beneath your feet, and the locals grow ever more inscrutable. You wake at intervals to the sound of the sea and the uncomfortable realization that, for all the dangers you imagined, the greatest risk might be that nothing will ever feel ordinary again. You wonder, not for the first time, whether the journey itself is the point or merely the punishment for wanting something different. In the morning, the sun will rise over a world that is neither entirely new nor entirely old, a world you must now navigate with nothing but your wits, your wares, and your growing collection of awkward misunderstandings. And so you resolve to face the day with all the courage of a man who has survived both the sea and the local cuisine, hoping that perhaps tomorrow's negotiations will bring something more palatable than root vegetables and regret. Days blend together on new shores, their sameness punctuated only by the faint hope that something unexpected might finally happen and the regular disappointment that it never does. You soon learn that discovery, like almost everything else worth having, comes wrapped in layers of tedium, confusion, and an unending series of small inconveniences. The legendary excitement of opening new lands is, in reality, mostly the business of waiting for someone else to do something interesting. The captain, who once boasted of the glory and riches awaiting the intrepid, now spends his mornings wrestling with headaches and ledgers. Each new dawn finds him hunched over an ever dwindling inventory of trade goods, tallying amphorae and muttering to himself about margins, losses, and the particular stupidity of his crew. He still manages, now and then, to deliver a rousing speech about the duty of the Phoenicians to expand the reach of Tyre and Sidon. But the effect is somewhat diminished by the fact that most of the crew are currently obsessed with the spread of mysterious rashes and the suspicious color of the local drinking water. Exploration, you discover, is not a matter of grand moments, but of endless, petty annoyances. The landscape you once regarded as a blank canvas for legend turns out to be mostly swamps, scrubland, and an abundance of insects whose only ambition in life seems to be sampling as many foreign sailors as possible. The local plants prove less valuable than you hoped. Most are inedible, a few are poisonous, and one species is discovered, after much experimentation, to cause spectacular itching in places best left unmentioned. The crew's attempts at cataloging new species of fish are thwarted by the fact that every specimen smells, in the end, exactly like every other fish they have ever encountered. You attempt, as all Phoenicians must, to extract meaning and value from the unfamiliar. The search for marketable commodities begins with great optimism. Perhaps there will be rare woods, or precious stones, or a new kind of dye that will make you all rich and famous upon your return. What you find is wood that burns too quickly, stones that crumble, and a variety of roots that, when boiled, taste like old rope soaked in vinegar. The fabled purple dye of Tyre, which you offer with all the ceremony you can muster, is received by the locals with mild confusion and quickly repurposed to stain baskets. Occasionally, you stumble upon something genuinely new. The captain records these finds with the grim satisfaction of a man determined to wring some meaning from an uncooperative world. There are trees with sap that glows faintly at night, insects that sing, and a bird whose call sounds uncannily like the laughter of your mother in law. Yet even these wonders soon become ordinary, their novelty worn away by repetition and necessity. The golden rule of discovery emerges. What is rare today will be mundane by next week, and probably a nuisance by the end of the month. Of course, there are still the practical matters of survival. The crew takes turns suffering from mild illnesses, each one insisting that his particular malady is the worst in the history of seafaring. Water must be carried from muddy springs and boiled when you can spare the precious wood. Food supplies dwindle, and every meal becomes an exercise in lowering expectations. You become intimately familiar with the taste of boiled roots, roasted insects, and a type of flatbread so hard it is best consumed after being soaked overnight. There are arguments about who gets the least unpalatable portion, which invariably escalate into philosophical debates about fairness, fate, and why anyone ever leaves home in the first place. Trading continues, though even this grows tiresome. The local inhabitants prove shrewd, perhaps even more so than your own merchants. They drive hard bargains, trading baskets and small livestock for your remaining wares, always giving the impression that they know more about the value of purple dye than you do. One afternoon, in a transaction that will haunt you for weeks, you swap a carefully hoarded ingot of tin for a collection of bright stones that, upon closer inspection, turn out to be only slightly more useful than gravel. The captain praises your initiative, but you notice he immediately buries the stones at the edge of camp. Some evenings, when the sea breeze is gentle and the insects are briefly occupied elsewhere, the crew gathers to reminisce about home. Stories are told and retold, the markets of Tyre, the sweet wine of Byblos, the warmth of sunlight on familiar stones. Each retelling grows a little more extravagant until the memory of home becomes more appealing than any place could ever be in reality. There is laughter, sometimes genuine, sometimes not. Even the captain allows himself a moment of nostalgia before returning to the burden of command. Yet, in the quieter hours, you begin to sense the slow erosion of purpose. The dream of glory gives way to the stubborn persistence of routine. Fetch water, gather firewood, repair nets, patch sails, and count supplies. Even the newcomers to these shores, those whose faces once shone with the thrill of adventure, are now as worn as the sandals on their feet. The ship itself seems to sag with the collective weight of disappointment, its timbers heavy with the knowledge that all voyages must eventually end in the familiar. Still, you press on. Each day brings small challenges: a broken pot, a spoiled sack of grain, the theft of a chicken by some enterprising local child. Each is met with grumbling, inventiveness, or, failing both, resignation. There are moments of beauty: the sudden flight of birds at sunrise, the shimmer of fish in shallow water, the way the firelight dances on the faces of your companions after a hard day. But these are fleeting, quickly replaced by the monotony of survival and the enduring question of whether the world, in all its vastness, is mostly made of mud. You cannot help but compare your reality to the tales told back home. There, explorers return with stories of strange lands, monstrous beasts, and untold riches. Here, you discover that most monsters are ordinary, most riches are best measured in dry bread, and the strangest land of all is the space between expectation and experience. Your journals, meant to be filled with wonders, record instead the number of new blisters on your hands, the frequency of rain, and the recipe for making soup from nearly anything. By the time the first moon rises over your camp, you have forgotten what you were supposed to be looking for. The horizon is no longer a promise but a fact, and your dreams, when they come, are not of home or adventure, but of simple rest. The crew, too, has grown quieter, their arguments softer, their ambitions dulled by days of sameness. The captain speaks less now, his speeches reduced to the practicalities of keeping everyone alive and mildly dissatisfied. One night as you sit staring into the embers of a dying fire, you realize that the greatest discovery of all is that the world is both larger and more tedious than you ever imagined. Glory is a fleeting thing, easily overshadowed by blisters and boredom. You wonder, not for the first time, whether the pursuit of new lands is only the oldest form of distraction, a way to avoid the inevitability of ordinary life. Still, you promise yourself that tomorrow you will rise with the sun, ready to find whatever it is you have missed. And in this, at least, you are no different from every explorer who has ever set sail from Tyre, hopeful, persistent, and only mildly disappointed that the world is exactly what it has always been. The decision to return home arrives not with the drama you imagined, but with the same listless consensus that has governed every other group decision since you first landed. No one admits it out loud, but everyone knows it. The expedition is over, whether or not anything has been accomplished. The captain announces it in his gruff, world weary manner, as if he alone is disappointed, though the look of relief in his eyes is unmistakable. The ship is patched, the cargo stowed, the motley souvenirs and half rotten roots loaded with all the ceremony due the ashes of failed hopes. Boarding the ship again is a study in anticlimax. The familiar planks groan under your feet, and the smell, mold, brine, and that unique, indefinable essence of too many men in too little space welcomes you like an old, unpleasant acquaintance. The new lands recede behind you with as little fuss as they arrived. A smudge of green, a blur of indifferent trees, a memory already beginning to fray at the edges. The journey home is a long unraveling. The wind, so fickle on your way out, now seems determined to hurry you along, as though the gods themselves have tired of your complaints. There are no songs. Milky's voice, never particularly welcome, is now banned outright. Conversation is spare and practical. The captain's lectures are confined to the merits of rationing water and the dangers of complacency. Each day is measured in the slow shrinkage of provisions, the creak of oars, the endless sameness of horizon and sky. You fall back into the routines you thought you had escaped. The oars bite your hands. The sails resist every knot. The food, never good, becomes a topic of bitter nostalgia. You find yourself thinking fondly of things you once loathed: the itch of home, the press of the market crowds, the suspicious stare of Tyrian tax collectors. It is astonishing how absence can make even the most unremarkable things seem like treasures. As the days stretch into weeks, the mood aboard settles into a kind of dour camaraderie. There are disputes, as always, but their energy is half hearted. The grand ambitions that once propelled you across the sea have withered into the simple desire for a dry bed and a meal that is not salted beyond recognition. Even the arguments about who did the most work, who carried the heaviest loads, or who risked the most seem rehearsed and ultimately meaningless. The ship itself seems to mourn the loss of purpose. Every plank, every rope, every battered oar carries the memory of disappointment. You patch holes with whatever is at hand, knowing that the real leaks are in your own expectations. The days are filled with maintenance, a metaphor perhaps, for all the ways you try to mend what the journey has broken inside you. At night, under the indifferent gaze of stars that no longer inspire awe, you attempt to write your account of the voyage. The ink runs thin, the words run thinner. You are meant to record wonders, but your chronicle is a catalog of repairs, minor ailments, and the steady attrition of enthusiasm. Sometimes, as you write, you find yourself inventing small triumphs: a successful trade, a friendly encounter, a glimpse of some rare beast. The truth is too dull to be remembered, too ordinary to make its way into legend. As the coastline of Phoenicia finally creeps into view, a mixture of relief and apprehension seizes the crew. There is no crowd to greet you, no cheering, no trumpets, no garlands. Dock workers glance up with mild curiosity before returning to their tasks. The great cities of Tyre and Sidon remain unmoved by your return, the endless traffic of ships and goods carrying on as though your absence meant nothing at all. The unloading of the ship is perfunctory. The baskets of roots and dull stones are met with polite interest, then swiftly forgotten. The purple dye is appraised, bartered, and traded down in value. The few coins you receive in exchange barely cover the cost of repairing the ship, let alone rewarding the crew. You distribute the spoils as fairly as you can, which is to say, not fairly at all. Grievances are aired, accusations mumbled, and the last of your unity dissolves like salt in water. The captain, who began the journey with grand pronouncements of glory and profit, retires to his quarters with a sigh that echoes through the timbers. He will, you suspect, spend the next weeks composing his own version of events, one in which every failure was a triumph in disguise. Some of the crew vanish into the alleys and taverns of the city, seeking solace in wine, women, and the comforting roar of the crowd. Others, like you, wander the familiar streets in a haze of anticlimax, uncertain whether to mourn the loss of adventure or celebrate the return of routine. You discover, in time, that the story of your journey is most useful as a warning. Young sailors and old men alike gather to hear your tale, hoping for secrets or omens, for glimpses of heroism or horror. You oblige, of course, embroidering the truth with just enough exaggeration to satisfy expectation. Monsters become larger, storms more violent, and the new lands more treacherous than they ever were in reality. No one wants to hear about the itch of insect bites, the blandness of boiled roots, or the deep loneliness of watching the same sky night after night. Years pass, and the details of your journey dissolve into the soft, comforting blur of memory. The city grows, changes, forgets. Your name is not carved in stone or sung by poets. The ship rots in the harbor, replaced by younger, sturdier vessels. The men who once shared your burdens drift away, their faces lost in the crowd. Only the old captain remains, a fixture in the shadowed corners of the dock, muttering about glories lost and opportunities missed. Sometimes, on sleepless nights, you wonder if it was all worth it. The pain, the boredom, the endless labor for so little reward. But then you remember the salt wind, the slow surge of the sea, the strange silence of dawn on foreign shores. There is something in the memory of going, a restlessness that no amount of disappointment can quite erase. Perhaps that is all discovery is, a brief escape from the ordinary, a chance to see yourself, if only for a moment, as something other than what you have always been. In the end, your story joins the great archive of pointless journeys, each one a testament to the human need to leave, to search, to hope, even when the world offers nothing but sameness in return. You wake each morning to the smell of brine and the sound of distant sails, and you realize that all the voyages of men are really only attempts to find a home they never quite left. So you continue patching, repairing, telling your tale to anyone who will listen, and waiting for the next wind, the next restless urge, the next ordinary miracle disguised as a voyage.